It has not been a straight and narrow pathway for Proposal P on the ballot. In fact, the Michigan Supreme Court is still weighing the qualifications of the initiative, and even if passed, the revised charter could be tied up in courts for quite some time. Just saying the phrase Proposal P elicits a ton of emotions in Detroiters seeking to make their voices heard about the future of the city and how it operates. The elected Detroit Charter Review Commission worked numerous hours receiving and sifting through a multitude of suggestions on how to revise the city's charter. Those working on the charter and submitted recommendations proudly declared that Proposal P is the people's charter, a result of the citizenry taking action to reclaim areas where they believe that the local government has simply failed them. On the other hand, there is a very loud chorus of voters and others who simply say that Proposal P is a problem, and it includes illegal language and will spiral the city back into bankruptcy. Joining us to provide a straight up analysis of the document is Dr. Esmat Ishag-Osman. I'm going to ask him to say his name when he gets on the screen. Reggie, we can bring him up now. And I apologize for that if I mispronounced it. He's a research associate in the Detroit Bureau of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. And he's going to tell us what's in the document and what happens if it passes or fails as a ballot box. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Ishag-Osman. Say your name for us one more time, because I don't want to say it wrong.
No, no problem. And thank you, Council Member Tate, for having me on this morning. It is Dr. Esmat Ishag-Osman. You weren't too far off, but thank you so much for having me to speak to your district today this morning. And thank you to all the constituents of District 1 for allowing me to speak to you guys today about this very important issue. So let me go ahead and share my screen. So
yeah. And one thing we want to make sure, and I think you actually have it in your presentation, some people are going, wait, who is this group? What are they doing? Because, you know, you guys are very scholastic, and some folks are being introduced to you for the very first time. You've been around for 105 years though, right?
Correct. We've been around for 105 years now. And actually our organization started in the city of Detroit. We were based out of Detroit. And just recently this year, the organization brought back the Detroit Bureau. And I have the pleasure of leading the Detroit Bureau. I've done work in Detroit for the last 8 years, have held a hat in every civic space, from teaching at Wayne State to getting my PhD there, to participating in grassroots organizing and community organizing in the 13th district, running a city school board campaign, working for Citizen Detroit as a nonprofit. And so I'm very honored to be able to lead government and policy research for the city, and be able to bring my breadth of knowledge to the city, or to the organization about the city. And so just for the purposes of time, so that we can get into the meat of the actual proposal itself, a quick note about us: we are a statewide organization. We have research associates. We're a small staff, but we have research associates that focus on particular policy issues throughout the state. And as was mentioned, I focus on the city of Detroit. So our mission at the Citizens Research Council of Michigan is to promote sound policy for state and local governments through factual research. And we do our best, and we pride ourselves on providing accurate, independent, and objective information. And just interesting piece of note, we have actually been involved in counseling and advising every charter commission that has been convened in the city of Detroit ever since the early 1900s in the process of creating the Detroit Charter. So just a fun fact and some cool history to know. So I know you guys have been already provided or will be provided on this information right here, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But whenever you want to go visit our website in terms of looking at our other reports and publications, please do so. And let's get started. So Proposal P seeks voter approval of a revised Detroit City Charter. It is the culmination of 3 years of work by the Detroit Charter Revision Commission that was convened in 2018. If Proposal P is adopted, The new charter would go into effect to create new departments and advisory commissions, shift the balance of power between the mayor's office and the legislative branch, and create new responsibilities for the city. If Proposal P is rejected, the current charter will remain in effect. The question of convening a new charter commission would automatically appear on the 2034 ballot, 16 years from now, or 16 years from when the commission was convened. Residents and city leaders could introduce amendments to address changes submitted in the proposed charter. And as Councilmember Tate mentioned, the fate of Proposal P could change depending on how the Michigan Supreme Court rules on its qualifications for the ballot, even though voters are still are currently voting on the issue right now through absentee ballots. The eligibility of the ballot question could change, which will certainly create some confusion. But oral arguments were made before the High Court on July 7th, and we are still pending a decision as to whether or not voters will be able to vote on the question. So some quick context, what is a city charter? A charter can be thought of as a city's constitution. It is a public document created and adopted by electors. It has three essential responsibilities. First is to outline the election process for city government. Second is to create the structure and powers for providing city services, such as establishing the form of government, key departments, commissions, or boards. And third is to provide enough structure to ensure efficiency in city operations. Yet a city charter has to be cautious about being too prescriptive as to limit the ability of elected officials to be able to respond to changing times. So put simply, it defines the city government's organizations, powers, and responsibilities. And even though municipalities in the state of Michigan, the state allots cities to be able to, the power to govern themselves and create a city charter, a charter must still operate within the legal framework that is established by federal and state law, kind of simply like the federalism lesson that you learn in civics class during high school. And so, brief history of the 2018 Revision Commission. It was initiated in 2018 with little turnout, and they've been working on this for 3 years. With one of those years kind of met with dysfunction, a little bit of turmoil. So one of those years was truly used for the commission to figure themselves out, and because a commission has 3 years to complete its duties, past commissions have really used that first year to be able to organize their central mission as a commission, to be able to start getting input from the community, retaining counsel to advise them as to how to go about the process, to be able to not only include provisions and ideas from the community, but how to get it done realistically through the framework of government and through the legal framework that is required through state laws and municipal laws. Okay, so Charter Commission has 3 essential responsibilities. That is assigning powers and duties to city officials and the branches of government, outlining functions of city operations and the types of services to be provided, and determining how citizens interact with their government. Over here to the right of the presentation, we provide a timeline of all the major milestones that the Revision Commission has hit within its 3-year span. Out of all the community meetings that the commission held with the community, that resulted in approximately 315 proposed revisions, addressing topics related to increased transparency, equity, representation, and citizen involvement in city government. So the proposed changes can be broadly categorized as expansive and ambitious progressive policy reforms. The proposed changes in this charter are kind of an unprecedented break from past charters in terms of the scope of the kind of provisions that it proposes. The revisions in this proposed charter are very much so emblematic of concerns of many Detroiters who feel neglected and forgotten in the recent resurgence of the city post-bankruptcy era. And we see that through the redefinition of elected and appointed positions, formation of structures and processes to ensure increased representation and equity for Detroit residents, increased access to city services and programs, and inclusion of strategies to increase citizen involvement and government transparency through an equitable development framework. Nevertheless, And we will go further into detail as to why this is. But this charter, even though it's driven by a focus on progressive governmental reforms, however, it does not provide the same equal attention dedicated to ensuring efficient governmental structure and function. Okay, so one of the major themes in this proposed charter is a shift in power between the executive and the legislative branch. This proposed charter does retain the strong mayor-council form of government that Detroit has used ever since the early 1800s. This form of government is very emblematic of the kind of form of government that you see on the federal level, where the president is the leader of the executive branch and Congress is the legislative branch. Same idea here. The mayor is the leader of the executive branch and city council is the legislative branch. So the proposed charter makes no specific changes to the authority of the executive branch to implement and manage programs with staff and operating departments. However, we do see a diminishment of the mayor's appointment power with public boards and officers, as well as certain executive functions that is usually the responsibility of the mayor. And that is what we mean in terms of a shift in power between the executive and legislative branch. There's a little bit of power being taken away from the mayor, from the executive branch, and conferred over to the legislative branch. One glaring example of that is that of advisory commissions. Okay, so advisory commissions are public bodies that are appointed to assist the executive branch in the development and implementation of services and programs that departments are responsible for. In fact, in the current charter, as well as in the proposed charter, there is language in Article 7103 that prescribes full appointment authority to the mayor to appoint members of this commission, to appoint members into these commissions. However, there are also various sections in the proposed charter that split that appointment power between the legislative and the executive branch, thus kind of contradicting language in the charter itself. So for the many new advisory commissions that have been created, as well as many of the existing ones already, the responsibility of appointing commissioners to those bodies is now going to be jointly split between city council and the mayor. Another example of this is the appointment of the chief of police. Traditionally, and in strong mayor council forms of government, traditionally chiefs of police are appointed by the mayor. In the current charter, that is the case. The mayor is responsible for appointing the chief of police. And in the proposed charter, now we see that responsibility being a joint responsibility between the mayor, city council, and the board of police commissioners. And lastly, another example of this diminishment of the mayor's power is the mayor's role in the development of a master plan for the city. This in the current charter, and usually this has been the responsibility of the mayor to lead and spearhead the development of a master plan and propose it to city council for city council to approve that. Now the mayor has been removed from that process, and it is actually the responsibility of the Planning and Development Commission to develop a master plan. If anything, have the mayor function sort of as an advisory role and propose that to the city council for them to approve. And so previous charters have maintained a separation of powers between the executive and legislative branch, having the legislative branch serve as an oversight check and balance of the executive branch. Provisions that grant appointing authority elsewhere, such as city council, can create conflicts in the process of governing and may prove to be counterproductive to the mission of running an efficient city government. It blurs the lines of responsibility and the lines of accountability, which can create confusion in those separation of powers between both branches. Another major theme in this proposed charter are attempts to increase transparency in city government. As Councilmember Tate mentioned, this charter has been referred to as the People's Charter by the public and by the commission. And transparency fits with the concept of the People's Charter. It should be encouraged in every way. A lack of openness in government creates an environment where there is potential for the lack of accountability and abuse of power. When any form of government is not forthcoming with information as to how it operates, it causes the public to be skeptical. And so right here, I provide a few examples as to certain provisions that attempt to increase transparency, such as making sure that specific directives or any sort of reports or employee contractor employee information is always provided and has to be posted online or to public boards. The mayor now being required to hold at least 2 community meetings in each district within a 7-month period, totaling to a minimum of 14 community meetings within a 7-month period, all of which have very specific requirements as to what these community meetings should talk about. Almost functioning as mini state of the city addresses in each district, and twice in each district. And so one of the challenges, however, in making local government more transparent is that of budget and resource capacity. Provisions that take transparency to the extreme can threaten to slow both branches of government to a crawl. And so one must ask ourselves, is this worth the cost of budget and human resources? We have to balance out the trade-offs between increased transparency and what that may mean in terms of the cost it requires to execute. Another major theme in this proposed charter is that of increased citizen involvement in city government. We see that through the authorization of 47 new elected positions and the creation of 102 new appointed positions. That 47 new elected positions, I know, is a big number, and some may ask, how is that possible? That is largely a result of the community advisory councils, which this is the 3rd charter to propose these public bodies. If authorized, these community advisory councils will provide for 5 new elected officials in each council district, making up 35 of the 47 new authorized elected positions that you see there. These bodies have been difficult to implement since their inception decades ago. And a reason for that is because of a lack of resources that has been put towards these bodies. This proposed charter attempts to fix that by now having these bodies be compensated. It is important to note, however, that several bodies, commissions, and elected offices in city government do not receive compensation. So that's just something to keep in mind, okay? And so the creation of 102 new appointed positions is also largely a result of the many new advisory commissions that have been created. And just there has been a switch in many provisions in terms of the method at which certain members are appointed to certain bodies now, certain existing bodies that are already existent in the current charter, and that is where it differs in the proposed charter. So citizen involvement in city government is extremely important. Local government exercises power closest to the people. So it's important for Detroiters to understand the relationship to local government and actively engage in that political process. Increased citizen involvement in city government not only makes elected officials and public officials more accountable to their constituents, to the people that they serve, but it also ensures that they do a better job in the work that they do. However, proposals in this document raise important questions. The first one is, will the many commissions that are created confuse the chain of command, lines of accountability, and decision-making authority? Second is, will the lack of meaningful authority, and what I mean by that is, many of these commissions that are created are of an advisory function. So they do not have any sort of oversight function, which means that really their true power is to advise either the executive or legislative branch. Without oversight function, there is no real power for them to ensure anything really happens, right? And so with the lack of meaningful authority possessed by the commissions doom this model of increased citizen involvement? And lastly, with little meaningful power and no compensation for commission members, will the roles of citizen input and advice be sufficient to attract citizens to commissions and sustain this model of increased citizen involvement? Another big theme, and lastly, the biggest theme in this charter, is that of policies that focus on increased social justice and equity. This proposed charter has a focus on providing more government assistance to low-income and marginalized residents. We see that through the public health focus that is provided by the health department, creation of a health and all policies task force, This task force would promote the health of citizens and eliminate racial and socioeconomic health disparities through public policy. This is a whole can of worms in itself in terms of what a health and all policies framework and approaches to public policy. But we at Citizens Research Council have published work about 3 years ago that describes what this policy framework is. And so if you're interested to learn more about that, please go ahead and check our website out. We see this also through the creation of new departments that focus on providing services to certain marginalized communities or providing, focusing on environmental justice or providing economic and consumer empowerment through the focus of small businesses. We see that through the creation of new services such as new water rate systems, creation of water amnesty programs, new tax abatement requirements with organizations. We also see this through the reimagining of policing, which alters the role of the police within this proposed charter. There are several provisions in the proposed charter that are intended to increase police accountability and address social justice issues related to the unfair treatment of Black and brown bodies by police officers, and largely responding to the recent Black Lives movement that we've seen happen. So we see this through the establishment of civilian rights and police provisions, new police training guidelines and programs, the removal of qualified immunity provisions from police officer evaluations. And we are also seeing this leaning towards defunding the police through language that says that money that is usually allocated to traditional police department services should now be equitably allocated and funded towards social service programs, projects, and activities, okay? We also see a new tax relief program and a new overassessment relief program in an attempt to address the overassessment crisis that we saw in the past decade. One quick note about the new overassessment relief program. This provision is an example. This program is an example of a provision within the proposed charter that conflicts with state law. In the state of Michigan, the state has central authority, quite significant central authority in the kind of tax laws that municipalities can pass or implement. And thus, this program would not be able to actually be implemented if this charter were to be passed. And it would be decided in the courts how to go about actually implementing this new overassessment relief program. And this is only one of I don't want to say many, but there are a few other provisions within the proposed charter that do conflict with state law and just simply would not be able to happen based on the requirement for charters to still function under state law. And so many of the provisions, so all the provisions and policy ideas are extremely important and they're relevant to the time. There are issues that have been ignored and they are needed to be addressed for Detroiters to have a better quality of life. However, many of the provisions are overly prescriptive and they can be pursued by other means of government action outside of the charter. Other states and cities across the nation are already passing legislation, pursuing initiatives for increased equity and social justice. And I think Detroit can start looking to these cities and model programs out of that. I also published a blog piece about 2 weeks ago that spoke about other avenues of action that the city and Detroiters can take if Proposal P does not pass or if it's struck down by the Michigan Supreme Court. The ideas in Proposal P do not have to die with Proposal P. There are still things that we can do, such as City Council creating ordinances or resolutions for programs and projects, and we have seen that happen with the reparations resolution that was just unanimously passed by City Council. We can develop public and private partnerships in the city to implement and fund programs, such as the partnerships that we've seen between the city and the Ford Motor Campus over there in Porttown. We can engage the city's broad nonprofit sector to assist with the provision and implementation of services and programs. During my time when I worked in nonprofits in the city, what I noticed is that a lot of nonprofits were doing incredible work, but there was no coordination and alignment between these nonprofits in the city to spearhead a certain mission or a certain initiative. And if we do that, we have better luck and better opportunity to be able to get many of these provisions done that are being proposed in this charter. Engage the vast number of foundations that work and serve the city on a variety of social justice and equity issues. And lastly, utilize state and federal resources and programs that are in discussion by the current administrations. And a perfect example of this, and I think you guys will be hearing a presentation about this after me, is that of the ARPA funding. The city council just approved a plan as to how the city will be allocating that, spending that money. And much of the plan hits on many of the ideas that are being proposed in Proposal P. And these are avenues for action that we can take. So the purpose of a charter is to give general authority and guidance on the operations and management of the city. Government efficiency is impacted if a charter is far too prescriptive or not prescriptive, or not prescriptive at all, in the sense that it's too broad or too general. One good analogy that I like to give is think of the US Constitution. Our US Constitution gives a framework as to how government should exist, what our rights and responsibilities are as citizens, this, that, and the fourth. How weird would it be if there were specific policy programs in that document, in our US Constitution? Use that same framework and approach in thinking about the city charter. A city charter is not supposed to have too prescriptive of directives as to how certain departments should be ran, as to exactly what certain elected or appointed officials have, how they need to function. Government requires flexibility to adopt organizational structures that can then maximize effective, efficient, and equitable performance out of city government. And lastly, I want to talk about the financial impact of this proposed charter. This proposed charter does mandate new costs, and some of which are relatively expensive. As you read through the charter, you will notice that there are not any provisions that provide either alternative sources of revenue or how to fund a lot of these new programs and departments. Thus, the incursion of new costs must come at the expense of resources that are used to fund existing costs or incurring budget deficits. Detroit, and it's also important to know that Detroit is still legally obligated to the 2014 Plan of Adjustment, which puts us in a position where we do not have too much latitude in terms of our financial capability and what we can do. We must, and I know there has been talk about this proposed charter having taken us back into bankruptcy. I think that's a little bit alarmist, but I will say that if there are no ways to fund many of these new programs and departments and provisions, it's going to be extremely difficult for the city to maintain a balanced budget, which then affects our ability to get a waiver from the Financial Review Commission. And if we don't get a waiver, it is very possible that we will go right back into state oversight, and then we would truly lose our independence as a city to be able to govern the way we want to. And there have been two narratives of the financial impact. The city says that to implement this proposed charter, it would take about $500 million a year to do that. We believe that that is sort of a worst case scenario approach. That is to say, if every single provision in the charter were to be implemented to its full capacity, then it would be $500 million. The commission, on the other hand, has said that it would cost about $7 million to implement mandated provisions, keyword mandated. The reason why that is highlighted is because there are a lot of provisions within the city charter that it is hard to put a price tag on it, because it's going to be essentially the responsibility of city council to determine how much funding is going to go to some of these programs and departments and appropriate that money. So us at Citizens Research Council believe that the actual financial impact of this charter is going to lie somewhere in the middle between that $500 million mark to $7 million mark. And I know a year, and I know that is quite a large gap, but that is where we stand with that, okay? And so I know we're running short on time, but these are just questions as voters to consider as you go to the ballot box and as you think about this charter, whether or not to vote on it. Ask yourself these questions. And if the answer is yes to any of these questions, then that issue is probably not suited to be a provision that is included in the city charter. or is it an issue that can be added to the charter by amendment rather than complete revision, or is a provision that can be dealt with outside of the charter through other means of action? Thank you so much. Thank you, District 1, and thank you, Councilmember Tate. And I'm open to questions.
Thanks, Dr. We really appreciate that. Very thorough, and we appreciate the impartiality, because as I've said, that's been one of the major complaints. We can take the screen share off, Reggie. That's been one of the major complaints that we've gotten from residents that, man, we just can't seem to find any information that's just straight up and down, tell us, you know, what we have, warts and all, but I would just like to know whether I support it or I don't, what's in the charter. And it's a very voluminous document for folks who are not readily, who don't read these types of documents on a regular basis. It can be a bit intimidating. So to have analysis that does that is extremely important. We're going to open up for questions for folks. Again, if you have a question and you're on Zoom, if you're on a telephone, you can ask your question by dialing *9. If you're on the Zoom and you're using a Windows computer, it is Alt plus the letter Y. If you're on an Apple computer, it is Option plus the letter Y. We also are able to take your questions from Facebook as well. I want to start out with my first question. We're hearing a lot about pensions, right? That's one of the narratives that when you hear people say that Proposal P is a problem because of how it affects the other P, pensions. So talk to us about how that line is drawn from the revised charter amendments and the pensions, and why some believe that that's a problem.
Sure. So I think, well, one, there is a provision in the charter that even speaks directly to that of pension rates, which says that the city council, the value and or amount of pension benefits of active and retired persons shall not be reduced without a 2/3 majority vote of city council and a vote in the affirmative by Detroit citizens at the next regularly scheduled election. Under the Chapter 9 plan that we have, the pension rate for retirees is determined in part by funding that is made available not just by the city, but by multiple sources other than the city of Detroit. And so, as the city's disclosure statement has made clear, the city cannot ensure the collection of the outside funding that we have agreed to. And a failure to collect outside funding may cause a further reduction in the adjusted pension amounts. Unless the city could make up for any reduction in funding itself, it does not have complete control over the pension rates for retirees. So I think that's important context to have. Something that and how that relates to how it's going to affect or drain on pensions is that, again, this charter mandates new costs, some of which are relatively expensive. If there is no method or suggestion or alternative as to how we are going to fund a lot of these new programs or departments or provisions, then you could see how the incursion of these new costs may drain from certain obligations that we have in the city, such as that of pensions or a lot of the legal obligations that we are still binding to with the Chapter 9 bankruptcy agreement. And so I cannot give you a direct answer as to like, yes, it is going to drain on pensions, but it is important to consider that if the incursion of new costs, they must come at an expense of the resources that are used to fund existing costs or existing debts that we are obligated to.
All right, I appreciate that. It looks like we do have a question on Zoom. Ms. Jacqueline Grimes, you are joining us today. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being here. You have a question for Dr. Ishag-Osman?
I don't know if you can hear me. I do have one question. In his introduction, he spoke about.
Ms. Grimes, can you speak just a little bit higher because you're really, really low?
Okay. Can you hear me?
We can hear you a little bit better. Yes.
Okay. Better. In his introduction, he mentioned about shifting the balance of power, and it made me think about the consent agreement that took place between former Mayor Dean and former Governor Snyder. So I was wondering if there were any similarities with that. And then my part two question has to do with the part in his delivery about the mayor becoming an advisor, possibly, or splitting that role between the council members. And I'm thinking the council members are the advisors. They're already really doing that work. So we wouldn't need a mayor, you know, if that's going to happen to the mayor.
So responding to your first question, I can't respond to that because I don't have full details on that consent agreement between Mayor Bing and the governor at that point in time. So I don't want to respond to that question without having accurate factual information to provide you as an answer to that. To your second question though, I was speaking about the mayor's role in the development and the proposal of the master plan. So traditionally, and as it is in the current charter right now, the mayor is responsible for spearheading and leading and developing a master plan for the city of Detroit, and then proposing that to the city council for city council to approve. With this proposed charter, the mayor is removed from that process, and the responsibility of developing and proposing the city charter is now in the hands of the Planning and Development Commission, that department. And what I meant to say is that in that process, the mayor may still function as in an advisory function, in an advisory role, in terms of giving the Planning and Development Commission some suggestions as to what they think should go into that master plan. But it takes the executive of the city out of the process of developing a master plan, which, you know, could be problematic if the mayor is responsible for leading and executing programs and departments that work to implement ordinances and laws that city council has approved.
Yeah, and Ms. Brown, just so you know, so when the consent agreement and the EM came on board, it really shifted some of the powers from council into the mayor's office, but it also shifted some of the powers from the mayor and the executive branch, the legislative branch and executive branch into the state. And that led to the emergency manager, who had all authority at that time. Since the consent agreement was dissolved, those powers were restored. City council powers were restored back to city council. The executive powers were restored back to the executive branch as well. All right. Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions online, team?
There are none on Facebook.
All right. Anyone on Zoom?
There are none in the chat.
All right. So I got one last question before we let you go, Doc. So talk to us about why is this caught up in court? You know, some people don't know why it's caught up in court, and that's where we may not have provided that clarity. So if you can provide some information on that, why is this item in court, and when will it possibly be ruled on?
Yeah, great question. So this proposal piece in court right now due to two lawsuits that were filed against the Detroit City Clerk and the Charter Revision Commission, not based on necessarily provisions in the charter itself, but more so due to a procedural issue, whether or not the governor's approval is needed in order to present the ballot question forward to voters. So it is truly an interpretation of the law of statutes within the Home Rule Cities Act, which is a state law, and it is the interpretation. It is the argument as to how to interpret that law, right? So it's quite unprecedented, and actually, when this happened, it made me realize that we have to reevaluate the Home Rule Cities Act and kind of do a postmortem analysis on it to make sure that it's clear so this doesn't happen again. But basically, one side of the lawsuit is arguing that the governor's approval is not needed in order to still present the ballot question to voters for them to approve on a new charter. And much of that argument is actually based on what Attorney General Nessel had said in her letter back to the commission after Governor Whitmer she rejected the proposed charter due to a lot of legal deficiencies. That is what they cited. But Attorney General Nessel said, you know, even though we rejected here, we don't need the governor. You don't need the governor's approval in order to put it forth towards the voters for them to vote on the proposed charter. The other side of the lawsuit says that you actually do need to have the governor's approval because otherwise, what is that process for? Why should any commission submit a proposed charter to the governor for approval? What is that provision for then in the Home Rule Cities Act? And because the Home Rule Cities Act provides no true path forward, once a governor rejects a proposed charter, that is to be interpreted in the way that we need governor's approval to be able to then put that question forth towards the voters for them to vote on the proposal.
Yeah, let me just ask this question really quickly though. So if we're talking about the fact that there's some items in there that are not consistent with state law, and this is a thumb up or thumb down ballot, a vote, you can't pick and choose as voters which ones you want, which ones you don't want. You're voting them all up or voting them all down. If there's some illegal items or items in there that are in conflict with state law, what happens if it passes?
So if it passes, the city is going to have to get ready for a lot of litigation. There's going to be a lot of provisions that are going to be decided by the courts. And obviously that draws resources away from the city, not only financially, but in terms of time-wise. We could be using that time to really focus on other initiatives to better the city and better the quality of life for Detroiters. But if this proposed charter does pass, and in fact, it is the unedited version of this proposed charter that is being proposed for Detroiters to vote on. So it is the version of the charter that has all these legal deficiencies. There's going to be a lot of litigation. The city is going to get sued a lot, and we have to get ready for that. In terms of when a decision is going to come, that's the $1 million question. The one definitive answer I can give you is that it has to be before August 3rd or on August 3rd, right? Because that's when the election is happening. And so we're all kind of waiting, us at the organization, we're waiting to see when that decision is going to come. We thought it was going to come earlier. In fact, it was supposed to come before absentee voter ballots started getting printed off. It didn't. And then it just kept dragging on and on and on. And so at this point in time, there's no real answer aside from the fact that it has to come out by August 3rd.
Got it. Okay. And Doug, I know we've got you got a time constraint, but we've got. I want to make sure the folks on Facebook have an opportunity to ask questions. This is what people have been waiting for. And
yeah, no, I'm here.
We are ticking away until August 3rd, right? So we want to have a chance to ask those questions. So I know we have a question on Facebook. Aaron, what's that question?
Good morning. We have a question from Karen Green, and I want to kind of hone this question in to apply it to the subject matter. It says, what in the charter affects retirees? I'm assuming they're asking what in proposal P affects retirees.
So it is a provision, the commission has proposed a new section 11107 in the charter that provides that the value and or amount of pension benefits of active and retired persons shall not be reduced without a 2/3 majority vote of city council and a vote in the affirmative by Detroit citizens at the next regularly scheduled election. However, under the Chapter 9 plan that we're still legally binded to, the pension rate for retirees is determined in part is allocated by multiple sources, not just the city of Detroit. So there are outside sources that are funding that those pension amounts, that pension rate. And that is essentially, if you want me to go into deeper detail about that, I can, but that is how the pension rates are within the proposed charter addressed and being affected.
Awesome. We appreciate you dropping by. We want to make sure that folks know that we do have your presentation as well as others on the City of Detroit's, the Councilman James Tate's page on the City of Detroit's website. Rich, can you put up that link, and can we put it in the chat, make sure people can refer to it? It has not just your presentation, but also your analysis. We wanted to make sure people can take a read of it as well. So it's a bit.ly, so folks, you might want to write it down. It's real simple because the actual website link is extremely long, so we wanted to shorten it for you. So take a little time, write it down, and it will take you directly to all of the documents, including our resource guide that we have for the speakers that are presenting today. Again, we'd like to thank Dr. Esmat Ishag-Osman. I'm gonna get it right.
It's all good. It's all good.
Research associate in the Detroit Bureau of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. Again, thank you for joining us. Maybe we'll have an opportunity to have another engagement following August 3rd, because we know that no matter what happens on August 3rd, this won't be over with.
Absolutely. And I would love to, I would love to come back and have another one of these discussions. And thank you again so much, Councilman Tate, inviting me on today. And thank you, District 1, for listening to me. And please feel free to visit our website. There's more work that I've published under the Detroit Bureau that speaks even more to this issue and a little bit about the ARPA funding. And yeah, thank you guys so much and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you so much. And again, for folks who are watching, you can take a look at the chat. We did put the link in the chat, so you can just cut and paste and put it into your search box and everything will come up. Doc, have a great one. Be safe, be well. We appreciate you.